Hey everyone, this is Tom, and this week's character is Arcelia for Teresa. So I had a hardware malfunction, and my Photoshop crashed, so I had to start the video off in a little bit of a weird spot. Just missed a big chunk of time at the start, but thankfully the file wasn't corrupted. This is the first time that I've had Photoshop really out and out crash without getting too messed up. But it's not too bad. So, since we missed it at the start, I'll go through a little bit of the stats that we're dealing with here. So, Arcelia, or Arcelia for short, is a half-elf Star Soul sorcerer. She's 23 years old, 5'3", 140 pounds. She's a half-elf, I think I said that before. But she also has albinism, which is a new thing to paint for a character. But that was neat. I'll get into that as we go. But as I'm just working out the pose for this character here, trying out less getting into trying out some more approaches to how I do things. In this one, I didn't stray too far from how I usually seem to work now, but getting into a bit more comfortable sort of life drawing sort of pose, a little bit more detail and time put into the initial pose than normal, which I like doing. It's sort of nice to flesh out the initial pose a bit, especially with things where like you have parts of the anatomy squishing together, like in near the armpit there, with the arm holding the staff. That sort of thing can be really nice to work out before you get to any sort of more technical sort of anatomical stuff that I usually do. Or even here, just with sort of like doing a connect the dots sort of approach to the skeleton. I think that's a nice way to sort of simplify it. If you're not sure where to start, that can be a good way to sort of help better sort of what sort of path you're going to take as far as how you're going to approach the order that you're going to do things in. I think that's a normal thing for a lot of artists, is starting drawing faces or people or anything from one particular spot. I remember growing up, I would always start with the eyes. Eventually, if there's a time in college where I would start with the ear. I'm not really sure. I think for the last probably for the last 10 years, I just start with an oval for the head. I used to draw the big plus sign or the cross through the front of the face, sort of showing where the center of the face was and the eyes. But the cross ended up just being a bit too blatant whenever I was done something, and it just kind of had this amateur look to it that was just sort of muddying up the drawing. Not that it's not amateur in a bad way, but just since I would rarely take anything to completion, all my drawings had this horizontal line through the eyeballs, and it just started getting distracting. And I sort of figured, I've been drawing for so many years, I could probably keep track of where an eyeball is supposed to go. So I stopped. I sort of just let that go, but I still just draw an oval for the head. But getting used to that kind of thing just takes practice, and it changes over time. But or even with the rib cage, I usually find myself starting with the clavicle or the collarbone and parts of the rib cage and the sternum. Just pretty comfortable. I'm not even sure why. Maybe that's another thing I can experiment with, is starting from somewhere else. That might be a good thing to actually see if it would have an effect. Like if I started with the feet and worked up, would that affect like the feeling of the character being grounded or not? Like if I started from the legs, would that make sure that like the weight was better presented or expressed, or how would that go? And that might be something I'll go after a bit. So she is a half elf. So in this case, I went to I tried to force myself to draw the skeleton a little bit more dainty than I normally do for things, but it's sort of falling into general human scale. I think quite a bit of the bones are still a bit too thick, but that's one thing I really want to make sure that I start getting better at, is making sure that the skeleton is fitting inside the body properly. It can be really counterintuitive where the bones actually are under the body. or under all the meat and fat and skin and everything. Um, and so I've even found, especially after starting this project of drawing people's characters and drawing it this way, that I look at people's bodies differently, and I'm always trying to look at for anchor points of bones, or sort of seeing when they walk and what parts of their bodies move, and tracking what parts of the anatomy is, or if like someone's running and they run by, and sort of seeing like the different muscles as they flex in their legs, and trying to track, like recognize them and name them, and it's just getting it's all crazy. I'm just seeing body parts everywhere. But one thing that always throws me off is how high up the pelvis goes up the back. It's very high up, and you can feel it on yourself, and it can be hard to remember to draw it that high up when you're getting used to it. Like tailbones are really high up, and it's a lot to it. I mean, artists have always said that like the human figure is the hardest thing to draw, or one of them anyway. And it's true, and it's constantly changing. Each one is different, but you still got to get it right, which is a weird sort of paradox where, with all the countless variations of a human body, there's still a way to get it to easily make it not work, to make it wrong, and that's a fine line that I might be able to cross one day. But in this case, she is quite strong. I mean, she's stronger than a normal human. Strength of 11. Although, I'm not sure. I believe this. Yeah, this is actually a Pathfinder character rather than Dungeons and Dragons. This is a first for the project. And so, actually, let me just double check that. Yeah, that's the case. So I'm not sure what the scaling is, but that's fine. What was I saying? Oh yeah, but she was described as having sort of a thinner, more slender torso, but she's got sort of a pear-shaped body, so like thicker thighs and wider hips, very pear-shaped. So that was sort of a neat thing. So I wanted to make sure that the upper body had a bit more muscle tone and maybe some bones visible, like some ribs, and then sort of exaggerate the thighs and how much fat was under the skin there, just to make sure that would be a distinct enough difference. So it's very fun. Very neat stuff. With every body being different, it can be stressful to either get the right reference or feel that you're really getting it the right way, but it can also be really, I don't want to just keep saying fun, but it's stimulating. It's a whole new problem to solve. I mean, there's not much overlap or parts of her body that are like squeezing in or overlapping or anything, but when you have very enough variability where you can like have different parts of the body like hang or sway or bulge or whatever, it's stuff like that can it can just, I mean, it is fun to draw, but it also, like, whenever you're drawing fat or whatever you got to draw, then that can inform the way that you'll draw other things later on. So if you're drawing like a big fat bulgy thing, then you feel like you're really getting a sense of how to make it feel that way. Then when you then go at a later time and draw something like lean and or lanky or muscular, then you draw it with a more informed way to make it look more like what it is, rather than accidentally drawing it all like fat and floppy. But in this case, it was actually sort of neat because there hasn't been a character that's been described as having any sort of excess weight or like characteristic fat deposits. But in this case, it is nice because then it sort of justified the existence of the skin layer a bit more. Because I mean, the skin is, I guess it should really be called like the surface layer, but normally the skin layer is just sort of a simplified version of the muscle layer. But in this case, it was actually it had a job to play where you can see the muscles in the legs are still just the same as as a woman with thin legs, but there's just that skin layer sort of going off, and and showing the distinction there. Now this hand was a bit of a struggle, personally. I ended up leaving it. I was happy with it, but the thing that I noticed early on, but that I chose to accept, was that it's gonna look weird. It's not in a very optimal pose or illustrated pose. I wanted something that was a bit more naturalistic, and sometimes this happens with the body, this happens with environments, this happens with pretty much anything, but there's so many times when if you draw something or paint something how it actually looks exactly right in front of you, it'll just look dumb or wrong, or unaesthetic, or not as interesting as it would. And I thought it was nice I kind of like how it wound up. I saw it as being something like that, where if you have like a hockey stick or a broom or something, and you just sort of let your finger pads do the gripping and just that friction, and then just pull your hand down and hang it. It doesn't move like how hands normally do when you draw them or think of them holding something, and it can just be a little bit distracting and wonky. But I was fine with that and happy with it, and I wanted to see how it ended up, taking it to the conclusion as it goes. So I'll get into Arcelia's character. So, as I said, 23, 5'3", 140 pounds, Star Soul Sorcerer, half-elf. She's half-elf, raised by her father, who went missing when she was 11. Raised by a wealthy but distant aunt until she was old enough to move out. She's supposed to be generally pretty, but has a few odd characteristics that she's insecure about. She has albinism, with white hair, pale blue-purple eyes, and very pale skin, also wears glasses. She's short and pear-shaped, so wider hips and a more slender torso. Wavy, mid-length hair, usually kept up in a top-knot style. She's got slightly buck teeth and a bit of an overbite. As a half-elf, she does have pointed ears, but not as much as a full elf. She has a curved scar on the lower left side of her face, running from her mouth to her jawbone, from essentially being dumb in the woods as a teenager. I assume that was just sort of a branch catching it as maybe she was running through the trees or something. Anyway, wears light purple lipstick to bring out the purple in her eyes, and because it doesn't create a harsh contrast with her skin tone, and kohl makeup, Kohl. That's a neat stuff. Anyway, back to it. A holdover from her angry teen phase. I thought it operated as both a tough look and reduced the amount of glare from the sun that hits her eyes. Also has double pierced ears and 2 studded helix piercings in her left ear. Again, holdover from her angry teenage phase. Clothing-wise, use a pale blue, lavender, and black kind of color palette. Her clothing style is a combo of stylish from a wealthy family and woodsy practical. Sturdy leather boots and leather vest, form-fitting pants, long sleeve, finely woven cotton shirt, heavy cloak, infinity scarf with buttons on it. She has a wooden staff and a crossbow and an overstuffed traveler's bag with things hanging off of it. Her staff is more functional than decorative, cross between a walking staff and a martial arts staff made of polished sycamore. Celia's father was a well-known hunter who went to help a distant town with a monster problem. The monsters disappeared, but so did he. Before he disappeared, he taught Celia some of his wood skills and was supportive of her burgeoning magic. Excuse me. Her aunt made sure that she was fed and had basic schooling out of respect for her brother, but neither helped nor hindered Celia's sorcery as long as it was not destructive. She doesn't know anything about her birth mother or elven culture and pretends she doesn't care. If her mother didn't want to know Celia, then Celia doesn't want to know about her. Her current life goal is to find out what happened to her father. Secondary life goals involve finding better arcane libraries and continuing her studies and finding a boyfriend who isn't terrible. Low standards, ... She has had 3 to 4 relationships in the past, all ended miserably. Probably not as wary of dating as she should be. While she's very charismatic now, it's because of extended practice and necessity. She's naturally introverted and dislikes crowds, and used to have a terrible stutter. She spent lots of time in the forest while living with her aunt because she found it easier to be alone in nature than try and talk to people in the town she was living in. To be honest, she still prefers forests. She grew up in the forest. She grew up into towns and cities. Doesn't always make the wisest decisions, especially in shops. Tends to carry around a lot of useless things because of impulse buying. She's a compassionate person and understands that every person is unique and worthy of respect and should be treated as such, but will also let herself be pushed around pretty easily and can be easy to manipulate. Emotionally supportive and likes to be generous and help others, though these instincts conflict a lot with her pure dislike of being social. She also has tendencies towards depression and low self-esteem, not helped by mild emotional neglect from her aunt, several shitty relationships, missing parents, and crippling shyness. Basically, since she couldn't learn how to be happy, she learned how to lie about being happy. She's always felt a deep-seated, unexplainable yearning for the sky. If she could, she'd go join the stars forever. It's instilled a lot of wanderlust in her, trying to find a way to be close to the sky as possible, a damn near impossible goal. Her father taught her a lot about constellations before he disappeared, and part of the reason she hated living in a town was the light pollution. Celia has terrible vision due to her albinism. Her glasses help a little bit, but not really. Need to talk to my game master about this. I think a penalty for sight-based tests might be appropriate. Oddly, for someone connected to the stars and... Oh, did my cat... No, okay, you can't jump up like that onto keyboards. Oddly, for someone connected to the stars and night sky, she's afraid of the dark and always carries around at least one light source and knows at least one light-creating spell. And then there are some links down to some samples of items of clothing that she had in mind, which came in very handy. And so that is the description of her. So now that we're back to the painting process, I'm going in and putting in the frame. Still worth doing. Still drives me nuts, but again, it is worth doing, and I'm happy to do it. It's just nice to have something that just keeps everything clean and orderly, and even in the last few times, just being able to turn it or to invert the white into black to help see how the shadow darker tones are doing. It'd be nice to have like an outsourced company that could just do this, but it takes 5 minutes or so. It's not too bad. So yeah, basically with the description for the character, with the pose, one thing that I found distinct about the description that stood out was the fact that she's afraid of the dark. This is the first time anybody's described a character as feeling any sort of fear or trepidation or anything that was other than charming or badass, basically, which is whatever. It's a good way to have. It's a good sort of character to play, but I seized on it. I thought that was neat. I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to have somebody in a little bit more of a vulnerable pose. Especially, she's got insecurities. She's got shyness issues. She's got issues with her appearance. She's got emotional issues, mental health issues. She's a vulnerable person, and I thought that would be a good, distinct sort of pose for her. She's not losing it. She's not crashing or caving in or anything or collapsing. But I see her sort of like coming across something or investigating like where that sound came from or anything, just sort of like that, where like she's not terrified, but she's on alert. My cat keeps wanting to put his hand in my cup, so I have to hold it away. He loves water. He plays with it. Anyway, so as far as the description of the outfit, I thought it was really thorough and really in-depth, and Teresa gave me some really good reference photos of stuff that seemed really totally on point with fantasy stuff. It's always nice when somebody just lets me know what they want in mind or have in mind for their outfit, especially if there's any particular sort of outfit or costume choice things. But I guess that's the point with every character. Sometimes I get a description that just says sort of, standard leather armor or just plate mail. They just have a suit of plate mail or whatever. But it's nice when somebody says like, well, they've got tightly woven, nice made cotton shirt, leather vest, looks something kind of like this. They've got glasses. Sometimes, I mean, there's benefits to either way, whether it's more specific or less specific. There's benefits and there's cons. It's nice when somebody has specifics. The good thing about specific stuff is that you don't have to think too much, and as long as you're just giving the person what they want, that can be nice. It can be really nice to just go through the motions and just sort of know where you're going. It can also get a little bit boring and limiting if you care about that sort of thing, and you want to like fly free or whatever. But the benefit of something that's a little bit more vague is, of course, being able to take it up to your own interpretation. You don't lose interpretation when somebody gives you something specific. There's still plenty of room for it. But depending on who the character is and who you are and what that person wants, that can just change how it's going to go. But either way, it's got to get drawn, and that's a lot more important than which amount of information you prefer. One thing that was really nice about Teresa's description is she mentioned glasses. So the character's got glasses. That's another first, which was interesting to do. But from the right from the start, she mentioned that they might seem a little bit anachronistic, sort of out of. Let me see. I think she wrote something here. Let me just double check. Yeah. So she sent me a link to some examples of some 18th century spectacles. She says a little anachronistic, which means sort of outside the time period and sort of in the wrong time. But I think a few societies in my friend's setting are industrialized, so I believe it still works, which is fine. That's all the justification you need. You wouldn't even need that much. That's more than enough justification for it. There was even the examples that she sent me. They're 18th century, so they're 1700s, but I've actually seen some sets that are similar from, what was it, James Townsend and Sons, sort of a colonial America Civil War era reenactment specialist, and they have like cooking episodes on YouTube, and he's got catalogs where they sell important equipment and stuff. But the glasses were a lot like what he sells there for reenactment purposes. And there was one thing about the glasses that they had in that time, and I don't know if I didn't notice it in the pictures for the reference you gave me. They're mostly from the front, but back in that time, it was common for them to have something called temple glasses, where the stems or the arms, the glass arms, they're the arms of the glasses. They didn't loop back over the ear. They stopped at the temple, like right, sort of basically where you're. Right before your sideburns start, and they would have a circle or like some sort of something with a larger surface area, I'd imagine, for friction, and they would just sort of hold them up to your head rather than resting them on your ears. And so with her, I gave her glasses like that. That didn't go so far, but then with her history of being from a wealthy, a well-off family, and somebody who learned from her father about the space and stars as best they probably knew in a setting like that, and the interest in the tying to the sky and the night sky. I just put in like a subtle, sort of like a crescent moon over the temple just to give a little bit of that theming shape, and then a couple little other decorations that sort of show up. I deal with the glasses at the end, so I can talk a bit more about them as we go. But yeah, that's where the glasses came from. It makes sense too. I mean, as somebody with albinism, I don't know if it's 100% consistent or very much or highly how common it is, but people with albinism don't have a fovea or a foveum. One of those two. It's the area in the center of the retina for picking up like the most focused images of, or the most focused light when looking at things. So glasses are common with people with albinism. Yeah, lots of neat little nuance and things like that. I even liked how Teresa mentioned a few details like the kohl eye makeup and the piercings as being remnants of like an angsty teenage phase. I thought that sort of stuff is cool. I like when people have a lot of that kind of, I guess, more lived in character stuff. I think that stuff's fun. That stuff is gold to a character designer or a concept artist or somebody who's doing characters. A big part of it is stereotypes and profiling and just putting in details that you know people are going to be able to read. It can be colors or postures or different cuts of fabric or outfits or how somebody wears something or whether they have brightly colored hair or not. Everything says something about somebody. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. But in fiction, it's more often accurate than not. So we all put details in that we think should be there, or we hide them, and both are two sides of the same coin. So, just keeping with the description as closely as possible, she's got form-fitting pants. So I wanted to make them very normal pants, like no reinforced knees. Like they're not adventure pants. It's really rare that you'd ever need. That's sort of reserved for like construction and warrior stuff. So no fancy knee pads, but I did give it a bit of a crotch, sort of like medieval style pants. They had a flap that would go up the front, and it would. Well, I mean, there's many different types of pants, but the ones that I was looking at had the flap out the front, and with two laces up in the corners, and just to give it they're sort of like a hybrid between just like 18th century, 19th century, just standard pants, but with just that little bit of medieval twist to it, just to help keep it a bit more fantasy. It's a bit challenging when there's I mean, this is Pathfinder, and it's a bit of a homebrew for Teresa's friends, but there's still enough fantasy in there that they can all work together and fit in together. But there's got to be that flexibility for including details that hint at different cultures and relative time frames and things like that. So even if you're doing like Western European medieval fantasy stuff, it's still absolutely critical to know about other time periods like 1920s New York or 200 AD China or whatever. The more you know from every part of the world, from every time that you can find or think of, the better. Every time you have an opportunity to watch a documentary or read a book or get into an endless maze of Wikipedia articles when you should be going to bed, you should take that opportunity. The more you know, the better off you'll be. You never know when the inspiration's going to find you. You never know when that little bit of historical trivia or product design, industrial design, or anything is going to show up and come to your rescue when you have no ideas. Which is kind of a... sort of leads me to a point just generally in art. And when it comes to ideas and like where do you get your ideas is something that I get asked a lot. And I mean, not just doing this, but even before, or people that I know that are artists, they always get asked, where do you get your ideas, or like what inspires you, or what makes you inspired? And the way that I answer the inspiration question is that if I waited till I was inspired to make art, I would make like one or two drawings every year. Inspiration is not a factor for me. I'm pretty sure I know what people mean when they say it, and kind of like what they're after. Usually I'll feel inspired if I'm looking at the work of an artist I respect, like Terrell Whitlatch lately. I've been poring over some of her books that one of my coworkers has at work, just feeling like a utter chump, just looking at her art. Or most of the time, it's music. When I just sit there and listen to music, my brain, like I like to just imagine like music videos, or essentially, or like scenes that would suit that music, and that gives me an idea what to draw, and puts me in the mood to draw. But when you're a concept artist, you don't get to wait, or even a professional artist of any kind, you don't get to wait to be inspired. Inspiration is sort of it's a lot more passive than people want to think. It's not like a tappable resource that you can just whip up. You can sit yourself in a position where you're more likely to be inspired. You can kind of learn what you like, and you'll be in the realm of what gets you going. Like some people will go have a shower. Some people will, like me, listen to music or talk to friends. That's usually for me. It's listen to music and talk to someone. All good concept art starts with conversation, guaranteed. If you just talk to somebody about what you want to do before you start doing it, you're going to have way better ideas, even if they're totally different than what you would normally do. That's actually a big part of why I started even doing all the notes at the start, is it was sort of a way to simulate talking to somebody else about what I was going to do, where once I sort of processed the information in the descriptions of the characters and wrote it out, it gave my brain a few extra steps to kind of process it before thinking about it too much or drawing it. Because normally it'd be nice to have somebody who's beside me and I can spend 10-15 minutes talking about what would be cool, who is this character, what are people like them like, and then that would get me off to a good start, or give me an idea to start off with. But I don't have that when I'm working. I just sit in a room by myself and draw. So that was where that came from. But yeah, so inspiration, don't count on it. But you'll discover it more passively. There's the kohl stuff. It's that Middle Eastern, really black around the eye stuff. I've seen people apply it. It's often done with pencils, and they even do the inside of the eyelid. Not like this part that touches your eye, but the flat surface that connects to, like, of the bottom eyelid to the top eyelid. It's that visible pink part that gives away makeup on TV shows for aliens. They have the pink around the eyes, which just drives me crazy. Yeah, it's sort of a thing about. It's one of the benefits of so not waiting for inspiration is, I find, like, the thing that helps with that a lot is when you start to feel confident with anatomy or perspective or color or composition. When you have those things, or drapery, or like fabric and floppy things, you don't need inspiration. You can just start moving. If you think, if you have experience, if you draw or sketch or just produce art or anything, you have the ability to just start working. When you work at a game studio, you show up and then you get to work. You know what you need to work on. You start working on it, and you need to get results. And if you don't produce, then you don't get to work there anymore. So you just have to work. And as long as you can draw, as long as you can build on things, it's more about what you know than how you feel. So if you're working on doing concept art stuff, if you just know about the world, if you just know about a range of subjects, you don't need inspiration. You just answer questions. You just solve problems. It's not about being creative. It's about being clever, or that's all I can think of. It's not creativity in a lot of senses, or in certain ways, or to the extent that people think it is. It's just sort of trying to find solutions to problems, or to communicate particular things about one specific person, or the role that an object has in a world where dragons exist. I guess maybe you can conflate the two. I think a lot of people could call creativity and cleverness the same sort of thing, and I would say that probably they are. But But as long as you're aware that there can be a distinction, I think you'll be off to a better start. I think there's value in that. Yeah, so there's a rant about creativity and inspiration, and yeah. So I think I was working on something else before that I derailed myself on, but I might come back to it. But anyway, so there's the glasses, so you can see sort of the crescent moon shape, just on the part that holds it against the temple. Just theming a little bit like that. I've never seen glasses like that, but now I have, and it's just based on a historical set of glasses, but just with a little bit of stylization and tweaking and design motifing based on what this character's history is. The kohl makeup around the eyes is just exactly that, but in this case, because it was sort of a remnant of her angsty teenage years, and also because she mentioned that it can also help with the light glaring into her eyes. I went with the heavier on the downside, sort of like a mix between like an emo kid and a football player. And that's why I put it the way that I did. I was actually a little bit disappointed though with the kohl stuff, not with how it ended up looking, but just with the fact that it was there. When I found out that the character was going to be an albino or a person with albinism, I thought it was fantastic. I like drawing people with a lot of variety, and they have one thing in common with a lot of redheads, which I love drawing for fantasy, and that's light-colored eyelashes. It's a really pronounced and distinctive or distinguishing look, and I was just a little bit bummed out when I realized that I was going to have to put kohl on her eyes and make it so that her eyelashes were dark. I did fight it a little bit. I did keep some of the lighter eyelashes out, but having those sort of obfuscating the pupils and irises, I think, is a part of what makes the look of people with albinism a little bit more distinct and everything. But it wasn't too bad. Whatever the character needs to be is whatever is asked for is what they get. And so I think the way that it ended up is a lot more in line with what Teresa was looking for. So yeah, even though she doesn't have melanin, there's still going to be the blood visible beneath the softer parts of the skin, where there's more blood vessels, but also where there's thinner skin. This just helps add life and vitality to things, and youth. She is only 23. Normally I like drawing older people, but in this... Oh yeah, another thing about the glasses is that I put a little bit of a thread here just to help hold it to her ears, so to keep it from falling off of her face. I think that would be suitable for somebody who goes on adventures. If she was just like a scholar, I wouldn't give her those. I'd probably give her something more like the line of pearls that would drape down around like sort of like a grandmother, something a bit more scholarly and more formal, librarian-ish. But in this case, it was, if she's running around, if she's the sort of person that gets her face scarred by a tree branch, she'd probably want something that holds the glasses on a little bit. So that's why that's there. So leather vest is based largely on some available fashion that Teresa had sent me, but the thing that I took most from it was it was a form-fitting leather vest, but it did have a fur lining, which comes in later, but it had a lot of segments of leather in different strips and facets and patterns, and it was sort of insectoid with how all these different, like almost tiles of leather all work together, and they sort of float around the figure. And excuse me, I think it's cat hair season. So I just wanted to make sure that I got that. It was color variants, shape variants, size variants, scale variants, and then on the side there's sort of like more braided leather work just for more flexibility, so she can sort of lean side to side in an adventure if she needed to. It is really tight. Like, it's very form-fitting. It's almost like a corset, and that would just like pop right open or hurt you if you were like hiking or fighting or running away from someone. So I thought having a bit of that flexibility built in would be good. It would be a wise choice. And this is just a quick other technique for doing in a bunch of stitching. I remember I saw my brother do something like this once, probably must have been like 15 years ago or so. He did this same thing just to do a bunch of like windows on a city skyline at night. You just draw a line or whatever you want to do, and then you just take your eraser and just zigzag through it basically, and just chip away the parts that add the negative space. And it can really help get the look you need really quickly. As far as sort of reminds me, just as far as like level of finish for things, whether it's paint, if you're going for something painterly or more finished, especially with concept art, you can work on a character for 80 hours if you wanted to, but you're gonna lose your job. But the standard that I recommend to people, the only thing to worry about is, does it read? As far as level of finish, it can be as blobby or scribbly or messy as you want, as long as you can tell what shape it is and what material it is. It's pretty much all you need to know. Well, I mean, you should know more and learn more and do more, but that's like a good level to think for yourself, and that'll be different depending on the individual. But as long as you get used to having your work be interpretable, the better off you'll be. Because a lot of the time, if you're doing this professionally, you're going to have your work outsourced to people in different companies, or different countries even, depending on how big the company you're working for is. And it can be, you'll take for granted how well you've drawn something, and they'll ship it off, and it'll come back as leather when you meant it to be stone, and you've got 2 languages and 7,000 miles between you, and 6 email addresses and different employees using them before it's going to get fixed, and that can get expensive for the company, and that's a bad thing. So once you get a good sense of how to communicate visually, then you'll be good. And a lot of the times in a lot of places they'll do something called texture callouts. I think it's probably different depending on where you work. But you can, in a lot of places, they'll be forgiving, and you can just sort of do like a flat color illustration. And if you just have a photo of an example of something that shares the same sort of character or texture or material, you just put the photo beside it with a line saying, these pants look like this leather, or these glasses are made of metal that has this patina, and you just have a picture of like metal with a patina that looks exactly how you would have painted it if you had the time, and that can save time and get results really accurately. And that can be a virtue. That can be definitely, that's a common thing in a lot of places just because of the time crunch and the amount of work that needs to get done, but I think it's just better practice to be able to just paint stuff if you needed to. So yeah, pants getting a little bit scrunched around the knees. It's one thing. I've got another pet peeve is people. I think it's sort of dying off now, but for the longest time, whenever you'd have somebody with boots, especially if people were drawing like a soldier, they'd have the tight leather boots that go halfway up the calf, and then a big bunch of fabric bellowing or blowing out and sort of making this weird, almost bell-bottom shape at the top, and that's it just became a bit silly, especially because you don't really see it that often. That's almost like a cartoon caricature of how military places usually actually do it. It does exist, but it's just weird. Anyway, so I just scrunching up a bit of the fabric. I didn't want to push it too hard because I know I used to draw things the other way. Okay, so this cloak, she's got a heavy cloak. This was one of those things where I thought the heavy cloak, she's a bit of a daddy's girl. Like, they spend a lot of time outside, like him teaching her stuff in the woods or looking at the stars at night. And with her sort of wondering where he went and the tragedy involved with that, I'd imagine that I thought it'd be like a suitable story element or like character piece of just having her dad's jacket. So it's sort of like a big outdoorsy, like a duster. That for him would have just been a coat, but for her it would be a cloak because of just how it drapes over her. So having just the hint of that with the sleeve hanging down, and then the sort of the shoulder pad or the shoulder parts over the shoulders or over her shoulders still acting sort of like a cloak that goes around. It's her dad's big leather jacket that she wears as a cloak. I thought that'd be suitable for a character like her. I guess something that that he would like put around her when they were like using the telescope or something like that. So the description was just for a cloak, but any chance you have to take any part from the character description that you haven't yet addressed, if you can just sneak that in any chance you have, that's a good thing to do. It gives you an idea. It gives you something that's distinct and also unique, and you don't have to worry about. Actually, this is a good point that I want to make. Is that, yeah, if you're doing that, if you're working specifically, if you're taking those little details those little specifics about a character, and you apply it, and you find ways to include it in the character, you don't have to worry about getting into sameism, where you don't have to worry about falling back onto your old tricks. Like a lot of people have sort of like their standard blueprint for a shoulder pad, say, or they always draw pants this way, or they have a habit of making this expression on the face, or something like that. If you go for the specific character, you don't have to worry about that happening. So with the description of with Arcelia having a light source, she's always got a light source handy. I thought something that that would be functional, rather than like a torch that you would need then a spark to light. Well, I mean, I guess this one would probably need a spark to light, but a torch is sort of messy and smelly, and you can't really put it very many places because it's just loaded with like diesel or oil or something. I thought something that was a bit more permanent and portable and official would have been a bit more suitable for her. I was inspired by a lantern that my wife's grandparents had. It was like a train lantern that you could swing around and it wouldn't go out. It was like for like signaling trains back in World War II. And I've always just really admired that little lantern. So I went and looked up, train lanterns and stuff, and I found designs with like the framing and the frame or the caging that goes around it, and sort of what are the main parts that it has, and I stylized it, stretched it out. I mean, I didn't just lift one directly, but I just made this sort of taller, banged up thing. It was also inspired by some like tea light holders my mom had in our backyard. With some little holes in the tin, and then I put a spike at the bottom for sticking it in the ground, and a big wide hoop at the top for easy gripping and also for hooking on stuff. And then the roll cage around it is there just for just protecting the glass, of course. And it ends up being glass. Yeah, I just wanted something that just looked like permanence, reusability, something that she brings around, and it would look good on like hooked onto her bag, like clinking around as she walks around. And because I didn't end up drawing anything really hanging off of her bag. I didn't go for the I didn't include much as far as the shopping addiction or the impulse buy stuff, but I figured a big enough bag should hold quite a bit. But it was nice to put in some time into the detail on this lamp. There's some old tarnished brassy sort of color, ventilation holes, and trying to just make sure that the volume of the shape is there. It can be fun working in layers like this. So stars and moons. It's another sort of hint at the stars or the astronomical aspects of the character. But working on stuff like this can be really neat. If I did it again, I would do it a bit more methodically. I would have the glass on a whole different layer, and I'd have the roll cage on a different layer that would go behind the glass, and then I would just. But it ended up working out just fine for how I work. So I've got to have like sootiness to show that it's been used quite a lot. It's got age. It's well worn and used, and tells that story. She uses it all the time. Fogged up on the inside, but still shiny and smooth on the outside. I like this methodical stuff, where you're running a processor, like a rendering engine on from like based on the world on something where you can apply it to anything, whether it's like a piece of clothing or a mountain range or something, where you just put the wear and tear where it would go if it was real. And I've talked about that quite a bit, where if you have any sort of chipping in metal or a worn edge on some fabric, it should only go where it would really show up on that character. Like, does this brush up against their leg all the time because of where they wear it, because of how they're left-handed, say? Then you would put the abrasion marks where that sword would go in the shape that those abrasion marks would go. Or with something like this, it's used all the time, so it's got the soot, and it's just those things that are just there because they would be there. That's another thing where it's not inspiration. It's just putting stuff where stuff would go, and just letting. It's sort of stepping aside and letting the character just be there and trying to, like, you don't want to be seen. Like, I don't think of this as my character, or this, look at what I did. It's like, this is what Teresa, this is her idea. This is Arcelia. It's not Tom. This isn't my character. It's just, this is what she thought up, and this is one way that she would possibly look if she was real. And real characters, real people, as I should say, real people have history. For these buttons, I made them out of I wanted them to look like they're made of abalone, which is a type of opalescent mollusk shell that looks pretty good. And then for another way to have some astronomical look, I gave her each one has 5 sewing hole string holes on them, instead of like the lesser number in the middle, and then just having like a 5-pointed star in the thread as a way to have some more of that star stuff, symbolism. Well, I lost my train of thought about that other part that I was talking about before. But yeah, that was it. But yeah, just letting the character just come through. And I know that sounds cliche and terrible, but I think that's just a big part of it, where I'm not thinking like, oh, this would be the coolest shape for this lantern. It's just, if she's gonna have a lantern, it's gonna have glass. She's got the money for it, and she lives in a sufficiently advanced civilization that would have glass, that could produce this, and that could manage machining tin like this, or producing this, and it's going to be aged this way. The roll bar is going to be all the wiring, the wire caging is going to be bent and wonked because she's been using it so long. It's going to have soot in the glass because she's got an oil lamp in there and might not have enough salt in the oil to keep the soot down, and it's not even, to me, I don't see it as creativity or inspired. It's all just, this is how it would probably go, and I'm just remembering things that I've learned from documentaries and books and science class and history and everything, and it just sort of ends up making its way through. And I love that stuff. It's a lot of fun. It even comes up with, like, if you're doing world design, or like a planet, where if you're, or a creature design, like say creature design, you start off with like, what's the planet like? How big is it? What's the mass of it? What's the gravity in relation to Earth? What's the atmosphere made of? Do they breathe oxygen? Are they carbon based? If the gravity's a lot stronger than on Earth, they're probably going to be more squat, or they're going to have their legs more pillar-like and beneath them for weight support. Stuff like that, where just like on Earth, everything is, whether human-made or something in the natural world, it only exists because it can, and that's the way that and it exists the way that it should, because that's what works. And everything in the real world is affected by forces outside of it, and I think that the more you better understand the fictional world that you're working in, you should try to run those forces on and consistently on whatever you're designing for that world that exists in that world. And that's the trick. That's the secret. So we've got just a couple minutes left. Lots of rendering, as always. So with these boots, I wanted, because she's out in the woods and stuff, I remember my dad would spend a lot of time in the woods, and I remember him telling me about how he had moccasins, and how amazing they were for running around in the woods. And I thought giving her something a little bit like that too, where it's a little bit more elven-y, was sort of something that's wrapped around the foot a few times. It's made out of longer, narrower strips sewn together for being form fit. Just something a bit more like that would be suitable for her. And then just sort of a nice standard crossbow with the foot slot in the bottom for pulling it up. I've usually just seen the two sort of versions, or the three. I guess there's the three versions. There's the ones where you put it on the ground with your foot in it, and you pull the string back with force, and that's a lot of strength there. There's ones with levers, and there's ones with cranks. I thought that just this simple would suit her well. This was actually fun, just making sure that the glasses were as strong. All the examples of people with albinism that I saw with glasses had very strong prescriptions, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss that. I think that's an important part of that sort of detail. And then for the frames, I wanted them to look a bit luxurious, so I figured just something like a bright, shiny, like platinum sort of mithril type metal, just with some ornate, some little filigree in there. They sort of, I was reminded of some of fancy sewing scissors my mom had that I'm sure that, like, everybody's mom had them. They're like the crane, like the golden crane bird, but they're scissors for cutting dainty threads. I kind of had them in my mind. I was thinking of these glasses as being that heavy and having that level of detail. Like, they had feathers and scales, and I just wanted to. This is kind of what made sense to me. And then carrying the moon shape forward onto the bridge over the nose, just the crescent moon sort of aspects to it. The bag, I figured with the reason with the strings in the bag strap is I figured that, or I thought of it as being like a bag that's seen a lot of weight, carried a lot of stuff, since she has shopping issues. So the string is actually a repair, where there used to have been a leather strap in there. The string is there just because it broke. It got worn out and snapped. I've got a leather bag that has a strap kind of like that, and it's starting to get a little bit thin, and I'm nervous about it. So I thought it'd work for her. The staff is okay, that's it. The staff is more utilitarian than decorative, so that's all it was. Just polished sycamore with the bottom worn out from walking and sort of frayed. But this is Arcelia for Teresa for the free weekly character art lottery, which I hold every Monday, or from Sunday to Tuesday every week at R&D Fantasy on Twitter. Just follow me, and I'll let you know what hashtag to tweet every week to enter. It's a new hashtag every week, and I draw your pen and paper tabletop role-playing RPG characters for free. As long as it's a fantasy genre, and it's pen and paper RPG, no video games, and it's your own creation. I'll even do it if it's if you're an author and you're writing your own book, and it's a fantasy book. I'll do it. So this was Arcelia for Teresa, and I hope you guys liked it and hope it helped. Thanks.